Shabbat Shalom. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. God spoke to Moshe, Hincha yoshochev im avotecha. You are soon to lie with your fathers. V'kam ha'am hazeh v'zana acharei Elohei nechar haaretz. And the people will get up and they will go astray after alien gods of the land. The Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin, page 90b, finds in that little half of a verse a hint or even a justification from the Torah for the doctrine of resurrection of the dead. You have to pay close attention. God says to Moses, you are soon to lie with your fathers. You're going to die, shochev im avotecha. And then the very next word is vikam, which means, and it can mean either, and the people will get up, but they read it as, and he will get up. Moshe will lie down with his fathers, vikam, and he will get up. At least that's how most people read the Midrash of the rabbis. But my commentator, my teacher, the Kli Yakar, says, wait a minute, okay? The rabbis know what an et nachta looks like, right, Jeff? Right? Et nachta, this is where the phrase ends. It says, Hincha shochev im avotecha. You, Moshe, are going to lay down with your fathers, right? And then the message continues, Vikam ha'am hazeh. The rabbis know that the subject of Vikam is not that of who's going to get up is not Moshe, right? It's the people. So this is a pretty weak, although that's sort of how Midrash works. But anyways, the Kli Yakar says this is a pretty thin soup, right? A pretty weak way to read justification for resurrection of the dead from when they got an et nachta wrong. So the Kli Yakar explains that actually, the rabbis knew that it doesn't mean Moshe will get up. That's not the story that they were telling. The story that they were telling is based on the pshat meaning of it, which is Vikam ha'am hazeh, and this people will rise up. And he says that what it means is that when the people rise up, and they commit idolatry, a sort of theological adultery in the land, that getting up, that rising up against Moshe, we should hear it in the same way as the word kam is used in a verse in Kitetse, Ka'asher yakum ish al re'ehu ratachon nafesh, that it's as if a person gets up in order to hurt or even kill his fellow. Meaning that the people, when they commit idolatry, Moshe will feel that in the grave. The sages talk about this idea in Masechet Brachot 18b, where they have a long debate about whether or not people who are dead can actually know what's going on in this world, whether or not they actually feel what's happening. They conclude the answer is yes, they do. Rabbi Isaac even said that worms are as painful for the dead as a needle is to live flesh. And by the way, it's not only bad news that if you do something terrible, that it's going to hurt the dead in the grave, but also it can be good. From this, they derive a teaching that when we quote a teaching in memory of someone who has passed away, then that teacher's lips are actually moving in the grave as we quote their teaching. Now, I mention this teaching today not because I'm really interested in suggesting to you the literal truth of this theology. It will change your visits to cemeteries, I suppose, if you believe this truly. But nobody has come back to tell us about what happens after we die. And so I will just say that good people can disagree about this issue. But I am interested in what I think is a very deep truth that the rabbis are expressing through this theology. And that is that the deeds that we do here in this world matter very much so to those who've died. Today is 20 years since 9/11. Many of those who died on this day have no graves. But the notion that they know that they can feel our deeds over the past 20 years and over the past few weeks is one that challenges me. On the 1st and 5th and 10th anniversaries following 9/11, I wrote several pieces reminding people that Judaism only requires forgiveness from people who have asked and people who have atoned for their sins. The Taliban have still done neither of these things. As they said, America had the watches and they had the time, and they have returned to a wicked and oppressive rule over Afghanistan, brutalizing women, brutalizing gays, finally forcing the last remaining Jew to leave Kabul. This is a season of forgiveness, but it's still worth remembering we owe no forgiveness to the Taliban, nor anyone who has hurt us and remains unrepentant. With all that said, I'm a rabbi, I'm not a political analyst. I'm not here to comment on whether or not we should or should not have withdrawn US forces a few weeks ago in time for this day, or whether it could have been done better or worse, or what in the world is the right strategy moving forward for fighting terror and protecting ourselves. But I think as Americans and as Jews, we have a duty to remember. The author Jonathan Safran Foer once wrote, Jews have 6 senses: touch, taste, sight, smell, hearing, and memory. For Jews, he writes, memory is no less primary than the prick of a pin. When a Jew encounters a pin, he asks, what does it remember like? I'm sure, like many of you, I was deeply moved by the story of American soldiers in the past few weeks who served in Afghanistan. And as the withdrawal was happening, they leapt into action. They formed WhatsApp groups. They contacted the State Department, congressional leaders. Some of them even returned to Afghanistan itself to help those who helped them while they were in Afghanistan to escape as America withdrew. They remembered the living, those still living in Afghanistan, and they felt viscerally the impact of our deeds over the last 20 years and over the last few weeks. As we remember that dark day 20 years ago, I offer as a lens through which to reflect, for us to reflect the extraordinary notion that those who died in New York and in Pennsylvania and in Washington, D.C. on 9/11, those Americans and Afghans who've died fighting in Afghanistan, the lens, the idea that they perhaps can remember and can feel our deeds. We need not be slaves to their memory, but our lives, I submit to you as Jews and as human beings, are always richer when they are lived in the presence of the memory of those who've come before us. The people will commit idolatry, and their deeds, the rabbi says, are an attack on Moshe himself. But the alternative can be true. Our lives can bring great comfort to those who've come before us. Either way, it's a good thing to live in the presence of those who've come before. A story is told that in 1948, David Ben-Gurion had a difficult decision ahead of him because he knew that the moment Israel declared its independence, the Arabs would invade. He had to decide whether or not he should postpone the declaration. And the story goes that he asked his friend and advisor Yitzchak Tabenkin what he should do. And Tabenkin answered that he would respond in a few days after he spoke to some people. When he returned, he told Ben-Gurion that it was imperative that Ben-Gurion declare the new state. And later, when Ben-Gurion asked him who he had consulted, Tabenkin responded, "I spoke to my deceased grandparents. And I spoke to my as yet unborn grandchildren, and I asked them, what do I owe you?" It is a thin life, lived only in the present, lived without a sense of history, lived without a sense of community, lived in the presence of a community that only extends in space to people who are here, but doesn't extend backwards and forwards in time. At the end of one of my favorite movies, Saving Private Ryan, Tom Hanks' character looks at Private Ryan, played by Matt Damon, and before he dies, Hanks takes Private Ryan's hand and tells him, "Earn this." He means earn the life that you are blessed to continue living because of the sacrifice that I and so many have made so that you can return home. Earn living with the memory of those who've died. It is a burden. It can be a burden to imagine that they feel the pleasure and pain of our duty, of our deeds, but it can be a powerful tool to live well, to live better. It is a great blessing to live in the presence of our ancestors, and in doing so, to earn the lives that we have been given. Shabbat Shalom.